Morning, everyone, and happy Vasant Panchami. I hope that all of you are keeping well and healthy. I am Sunandita Chaudhary. I am the Secretary of Embrace, the Admissions Committee here at SMAIT Jodhpur, and I'll be moderating today's masterclass session. Joining me today are Ritika Shukla, Prachiti Dad, and Rishin Dubey, who are members of the Admissions Committee, and they would be answering your queries through the chat box. So, at any point, you can go ahead with your queries through the chat. And towards the end of the session, I will request the participants to raise their hands if they have any questions, and then we'll follow the sequence accordingly. So, with that, let's start today's second masterclass, and it's an exciting one at that. In the virtual dais with us, we have Professor Deepak Saxena, our esteemed faculty for information systems here at SME. Sir is an MTech from IIT Kanpur, and he completed his PhD from the Trinity College in Dublin. The session will be driven by our industry expert, and I will request Dr. Deepak to take over the virtual dais and introduce him.
Okay, thank you. Today's Vasant Panchami, as you mentioned, and why it's there is no better day for sharing more knowledge. And with us, we have Mr. Pradeep Mishra, a senior vice president with V Commercial Vehicles. And just to give you some context, he is a BITS MMS graduate, Master in Management Science, and he started his industry journey in 1996 from the purchase and supply chain domain. And so you can imagine that perhaps many of our aspirants may not have reached the age, the number of years of experience he has. And it was the time where management education and even IIMs were unheard of in the middle class, at least. So that tells the rich experience he brings with him. And just so I would like to call him a academic in that sense, that he's a practitioner, but he has strong academic interest that reflects in a number of additional degrees he earned after his MBA, and I gather even now he has registered in some degrees. So that shows the zeal for learning in him. And at the same time, he also likes to share his experience with the new cohort, with new students. So he's actively involved with NITI Mumbai and Symbiosis Pune. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Mishra. Over to you, please.
Good morning, Dr. Deepak, and all the IIT Jodhpur admission committee members and the students, the fellow students. I would call them fellow students because I am also a student. So my purpose here is not to share knowledge, but to gain knowledge and learn together. And wish you all a very, very happy Basant Panchami. I think this is a very, very auspicious day today. So we invoke Goddess Saraswati, who is the abode of learning. And we are in the temple of learning at IIT Jodhpur, is one of the finest temples. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Deepak for inviting me to share this platform. And I think with Dr. Deepak, apart from having brief interaction when he was at BITS Pilani, I think we also share common interests in many areas, and also we have a regional affinity. So, so thanks a lot, Dr. Deepak. And I would try to share some of my experiences in the past role when I was handling supply chain and purchasing and this thing. I have recently moved to a new assignment within the organization effective 1st of February, which is more from a concept to commercialization of a new product project. So anyway, can I share some of the slides, Dr. Deepak, before I...
Yes, go ahead, please.
So that structure we will follow, and if we can give me the access,
Yes, sir. I'll just look into it.
yeah.
So you'll be able to share.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Please let me know when you see the slide.
Yes, sir. We can see it now.
Uh, so good morning once again, all the students, and I'm very fortunate to be amongst you today. And the topic that we are going to discuss today is the supply chain imperatives, and what can be the strategies. I don't say that these are the fixed strategies for managing uncertainties and disruptions. But before I go there, I would like to maybe start with a small interaction in terms of asking you some questions. What do you understand by supply chain? Because you are all MBA students, and probably you must be having some courses in supply chain and operations management also. So what do you understand by supply chain, and how does it impact today's world? So if I may get some answers to that question.
So management, sir, I'm Srinjoy Kaur.
Yeah.
I'm actually pursuing from NIT, my BTech from NIT Agartala. So,
Okay.
sir, according to me, supply chain is actually the flow of the goods and services, like from the production line to the distributor to the customers, and this is what, sir, supply chain is.
Okay.
Unique.
Any more thoughts?
Sir, it is a network between producer and customer.
Okay. So we heard two important words. One was flow of goods from one destination to another destination, flow of goods and services. Secondly, you mentioned is about the network of things, right? Any other thoughts? I think whatever you people have mentioned is absolutely correct. And in the sense that in today's world where we are living in, value chain or the supply chain, it starts from the time a demand is generated into the value chain. So once a demand is generated into the value chain, and that demand, when it translates to a requirement for custom to a supplier partner, it can be in the any tier. It could be tier 10 supply chain partner, to maybe the tier one. So from demand generation to the requirement generation to a tier supplier partner, and from there the flow of parts or goods or raw material or component to any service to the manufacturer, and from manufacturer to the customer, and even after the goods have been serviced, how this is taken to the life cycle management of the product. I think this all constitute supply chain. So today we are going to talk about a lot of disruptions, and the brief agenda which I will cover would be like this. We will be talking of some of the disruptions and the impact of the risks. What kind of transformations are taking place in the supply chain domain? We will talk of digital sustainability, because we are hearing a lot of IT infrastructure getting created again around supply chain domain. But are these digital ecosystem, how secure and safe it is? What are the risks involved? And then we will end the session with some reflections and takeaways. So If we look at last, I mean, this is one example I would like to quote. In March 2011, in Japan, we had this tsunami. All of you are aware of. So 9 magnitude on the Richter scale. This was the earthquake which hit. I mean, that was the highest magnitude earthquake. And this earthquake actually created huge tsunami wherein uh, it impacted the supply chain of Toyota Motor Corporation. And at that point in time, Toyota Motor Corporation was building almost 45% of its vehicles in Japan. And all these plants were closed for uh, more than 60 days. Similarly, because of this impact in Japan and the ancillaries of Toyota, there was a production cut they had to take to the extent of 30% in their North American plants because they were facing a lot of shortages of different parts that are produced in Japan. And as a consequence, Toyota had a fall of profit almost to the extent of $1.36 billion. This was in only single quarter, which was second quarter of 211. Now, this classic example actually is known as last dance of just in time. Before that, all of us, we are aware that Toyota production system is very renowned for just in time management of inventories. Subsequent to that, Toyota ensured that they went into a strategy which was moving from just in time to creating buffer inventories in the ecosystem. And let me tell you, even, I mean, when the pandemic hit 2 years back, and till August and September of 2021, they were having very good inventories. And learning lesson from this catastrophe, they had accumulated a lot of semiconductors because that is another example which I will be talking of in today's discussion. They created huge inventories of parts, not only with them, but with their supplier partners, with their value chain partners, and also they moved from sourcing from one country, one location to multiple countries, multiple locations. So that brought a lot of change in their risk mitigation strategy, and this is known as the last dance in just in time. Of course, we are aware what kind of havoc COVID-19 has created, and today, when we are talking of COVID pandemic, when it hit in the month of December 2019 in China, it was not a pandemic. It was supposed to be a simple pneumonia, unknown pneumonia, which was causing lung infection diseases, and never anyone knew that it is going to create a disruption for the entire world. Come January 2020, China declared close down of their country for almost 2 weeks, followed by 2 weeks of lunar holiday, which is known as Chinese New Year. And after that, World Health Organization, they took cognizance of the consequences of this disease, and they came and they announced this as a global pandemic when it spread to Europe from China. Now, this had created major havoc and disruption in the supply chain management. We will see how it happened because China was closed for 2 weeks, and China then went into very, very strict lockdown from end of January to almost end of March. It was a 60 days lockdown in China. And as you all know, China is the factory of the world. It created huge disruption across the world for the supply chain managers. Then followed by Europe, followed by USA and North America, and then it came back to Asia, India. So likewise, that cycle was there. Next, of course, all of you know how semiconductor crisis is creating disruptions across the world. And today, semiconductor industry is 0.6 trillion industry. This is the fourth most traded commodity in the world, after oil, automotive parts, and you know so this is the fourth most traded, and it is expected that it will reach $1 trillion dollar revenue by 2030, the way it is growing. In last 2 years, it has grown from almost by 50%. And this industry, uh, in any case, was growing leaps and bounds even before the pandemic hit in 2020. And in the pre-COVID times, semiconductor industry was almost working with 90% capacity utilization. And there were no fresh capacity additions that were happening in this industry, which is the sad part. And knowing that the world is moving to a much more digital world, and there was we were talking of so much of digitalization, and with the advent of artificial intelligence, machine learning, autonomous vehicles, uh, then transition of telecommunications to higher frequency bands, semiconductor industry was supposed to be growing at almost this pace. Whether the pandemic would have been there or not, we would have landed up into this crisis. So there are two types of crisis which has actually hit the globe today. One, because of the structural capacity problems in the demand and supply of the chips, and second, because of the sporadic closures of plants across the world because of either pandemic or some or the other natural disasters. Like, for example, last year February, in Texas there was a huge winter storm which led to the closure of many plants there, like Intel and likewise NXP, Intel. These are the semiconductor manufacturers who had to close down their plants. Similarly, there was a fire in one of the factories in Japan, Renesas factory in Japan, which led to closure of the factory for almost 30 days. There was famine in Taiwan. There was floods in Vietnam. There was this labor crisis in Eastern Europe, where most of the semiconductor front-end industries are located. And then there were severe COVID in Malaysia and Indonesia during third quarter of, or sorry, July to September quarter of last year. All these small scale disruptions led to this aggravated the problem of the capacities for the chips. And as we stand today, this is going to be a major disruptor for not only for the automobiles. Automobile, of course, is one of the worst sufferer of the semiconductor crisis. But apart from automobiles, even the computing devices, even the mobile devices, all the demands. You see, for example, you would have heard Apple has stopped production of iPhones, which are version less than, I think, 8 or 10. The reason being that they are going into value-added chips, which are where the capacities are available, and also the semiconductor manufacturers are expanding their capacities in the new technology chips, which are maybe 30 nanometer to 3 nanometers. And so we are seeing more migration towards value addition even in the chips. And for example, automobiles, of course, are going for a major crisis because there the technology is still older. So anyway, so that is one topic which is very complex, and it is hitting the world in a very big way. Of course, we have seen many other disruptions that has hit the world economy. We have seen that there is a global container congestion across the ports of the world. Average waiting period in the US for the goods arriving from Asia was almost 60 to 70 days in last entire year. And even if the ships, first of all, the ships were not able to dock into the ports, And even if they were able to dock into the ports, they were waiting for the containers to be unloaded because there was no labor available. And once the containers were unloaded from the ships, there was no drivers available to take these containers from the port or the coastal areas to the consumption locations. So this kind of a thing has created massive disruption across the world. Today, containers, if you want to export out of the country, the waiting period for the container availability is close to 30 to 45 days. And freight rates have gone maybe 4x or 5x. Container which used to cost a 20-foot container, which used to cost about $2,500 from say Shanghai port to LA port in west coast of US, it was costing about $10,000. And there is no respite as of now. Of course, the geopolitical tensions that we keep hearing between US and China, this is there. There's a huge demand supply gap. We have seen the example of vaccines. Even though the rich countries, they are able to have multiple booster doses now, there are countries, poorer countries, who do not even have access to the first dose because they don't have vaccines available. Similarly, we saw that there was this ship which was stuck in not Panama. This is my mistake. It's a Suez Canal, and this disrupted the entire logistics. Commodity prices went up by 60 to 70 to 80% in the last 1 year. And of course, there are many, like in India, we have seen demand of CNG vehicles have gone up significantly because of, migration to the greener fuel. But the capacities are not there. So overall, what I'm trying to say is that there are multiple, apart from the disruptions of the scale of COVID or chips or containers, there are other small scale disruptions like commodity prices, or even a small disruption of a ship getting stuck in a canal creates a huge disruption across the world. It is not only that one country there is no sovereign autonomy as far as supply chain is concerned for any country today in the world. We are interdependent globally. So what is this is resulting into? Now, this I have coined a word called butterfly effect in the supply chain. Now, the impact of the disruption is almost 10x. These small complexities and problems, these are resulting into 10x disruption, because one disruption in any point into the value chain is resulting into ripple effect across the supply chain. So as I was mentioning, there is no sovereign autonomy, and as a result, this is creating nightmares for the supply chain managers across the world, leave aside any industry. So this is called a butterfly effect, where you are able to actually identify where is the optimal balance, and you are not able to create that optimal balance. Like a butterfly, you cannot catch a butterfly if it is flying. It is not stable. So the supply chain is highly unstable today, and that is called the butterfly effect. So if that is the case, what do we need to do? How do we handle this butterfly effect? And there are few new solutions. Of course, one is the resilient risk management. Now, when we are talking of butterfly effect, what are the parameters, what are the variables which are impacting the vulnerability of the organizations? So how vulnerable your supply chain is? I think now there are a lot of studies which are being done to create this vulnerability index. And as an independent study, I'm also, I'm doing some kind of a research in this area to create the vulnerability index for the organizations, irrespective of the segment, whether it is automotive, telecom, white goods, consumer goods, whatever it is. So there are multiple factors which determine, this vulnerability index for the companies and the organizations. Based on this, and if we look at, we can create a risk management structure across once we know what is our vulnerability. There is a probabilistic planning model. I mean, all along we have been talking of, in a supply chain world, we want to look at, typical uh, uh, SNOP planning, which is known as sales and operations planning in supply chain management. Here, the demand planning, we were talking of a forecast, okay, 6 months forecast or a 9 month forecast or a 12 months forecast, which is more deterministic planning model. You know a certain demand which is going to be there for 6 months or 8 months, and you go ahead with that kind of a planning. However, today, for example, semiconductor manufacturers, they themselves don't know when their capacities are going to come into full mainstream. But you know if they are working for a 18 months window for a planning model, I don't know how sustainable that is going to be. Then of course we need to bring in a lot of digital and digital balance into the supply chain. So digital sustainability is one thing which is there. And if we have to look at what are the levers for uh, approaching the risk, how we can create resilience within the value chain, I think there are four major steps. It's not a brainer of identifying the risk, assessing the risk, identifying what are the risk mitigation strategy, and then creating a credible system which will monitor this risk in terms of the implementation strategies. So this is how the risk has to be done. And uh, you know even if you have all these steps, until unless there is a culture which is created within the organization, until unless the organizations are aware of the predictive uncertainties, how much you are able to identify what is behind this or beneath the surface, which is not clearly visible to us, which is hazy. I think this is something which is very important, and it comes through building an awareness culture within the organization and employees. We got to be forward looking. I'm not saying that we have to, uh, have a blind eye to the current realities, but at the same time, current realities and the past trends, this should help us forecast. I mean, when we are talking of, say, R6 or R12 trends. Typically in supply chain, we talk of past trends to forecast the future. I think gone are those days. We got to look at what are those parameters which are going to impact our future demands planning. I mean, we are talking of, one example I will give is geopolitical tensions between China and US. Look at what is happening in Ukraine. If Russia invades Ukraine, what kind of impact it is going to create for the global business? That is another factor which will impact. If China invades Taiwan, you know, in his hunger for more region, what will happen to the world economy? Because the entire, or say 50-60% of semiconductor manufacturing sits in Taiwan. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company is the biggest semiconductors, has the biggest semiconductor foundry in the world. So these geopolitical issues were not of that important consideration, but they have become the most important consideration today. If, for example, between China and India, there are, I mean, if we are talking of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and we are doing a lot of right steps in this direction. However, my feeling is that we could have done this maybe 6 years or 7 years or 10 years back. We are behind the game right now. So we have to create this culture, and in supply chain, there are a lot of blind spots. We cannot predict them. We are not able to identify them. Most of you would be driving cars, and you must be seeing that we are not able to see what is behind this pillar. And many a times we are also blind to what happens in the supply chain. Now, how can we overcome this blindness? We cannot overcome completely. However, there are methods. We need to be aware of customer needs. We got to check how our supplier partners are responding to various disruptions in the market. We have to be very, very agile. I think this is extremely important in a strategic supply chain organization. We have to look at various strategies like localization, which we just discussed, regionalized procurement strategies, which Toyota adopted. They moved from Japan to Taiwan to Indonesia to Thailand. And most important of all is the relationship building with your partners within the organization as well as outside the organization. So blind spots are something which cannot be avoided in a supply chain, but we can identify them with some effort. We have talked of deterministic supply chain. Here we said that this deterministic supply chain model, which was followed in the pre-COVID area, where we were looking at SNOP planning and traditional planning, demand planning generation, which was there. This was a sequential forecasting. So we have to now take advantage of technology. We have to recalibrate the strategy, look into how the commercials are impacting your new strategy, and logistics play a very important role in the new planning mechanism. In a probabilistic supply chain model, we are not fixated with one plan. We have multiple plans, and plan A, plan B, plan C. You have 26 alphabets in the English this thing. So you can create multiple plans and adopt the right plan for your organization. So I'm not saying you have to be too thinly spread, but at least scenario planning is something which we must do. And my view is that when we are creating this vulnerability index, and based on this vulnerability index, suppose you are very high in the vulnerability, then how you create a resilience index or the recovery index for your organization. Now, in that, I think we will have to deploy a lot of algorithm and AI-based computational model, which will help you in identifying and creating a model which is very adaptive to your own organization. So that is another. This is a second part of my research, which I am trying to work upon to give that kind of a resilience index or the reliability supply chain reliability index, which will result into the resilience for the company. And of course, agility and connected is something which is there. And identifying prompts. There will be volatility, there will be uncertainty, complexity, disruptions will be there. What are those prompts, and how do you adjust against those volatility that is going to emerge into the. So these are the four key elements of probabilistic supply chain management, which will result into high reliability and resilience in the organization. When we talk of supply planning in a connected world, we are talking, there is again 4 steps. It starts with the data-driven insights. I talked of the quantitative computational models. We also need to look at the demand forecasts, which cannot be based on the past trends, but it has to be more forward-looking, and then create a plan. Some of the enablers could be, how do you work in the network which is more optimized in nature? How is the information flow in the entire ecosystem? Of course, the raw material and child parts planning, which should be integrated with the demand. And most important of all, how do you de-risk your capacities? It could be a regional capacity, it could be a rational capacity, or it could be more relationship capacity. So I think relationship capacity I just mentioned, this is also equally important. And here we are talking of again, the system will help us create always on agility model. So it will predict the risk, and it will prompt the risk, and it will help you calibrate your or recalibrate your strategies. Now here we are talking of connected community, which is more of a network based organization. The entire value chain has to be a network based optimization community. Optimization has to be intelligent, end to end transparency, and make all your uh, supplier partners, or the value chain partners participate in the decision making process. Let them be partners in the true sense. And when you create this kind of a digital network, I think this is really going to create the transparency which is needed for the decision making. And there are many tools today which are available to help implement these probabilistic planning model using the AI interface. Of course, cognitive computing, cloud applications are there, and data analytics. And of course, we can use a lot of Internet of thing devices across the value chain and the ecosystem to enable these processes. So we have talked about what are the pitfalls in the supply chain, what are the strategies which can help overcome these pitfalls, how a probabilistic supply chain model can help us create a vulnerability index, and that vulnerability index, what parameters you can use for your creating your resilience and recovery model in terms of the risk management. Another important risk which is there, which is coming from all this digital transformation, is the cyber security risk, which is extremely important in today's world. And we have seen, there are attacks which are there. APT attacks are there. There are phishing attacks. There are malicious attacks, social engineering attacks. We have seen DOS. There are nation state sponsored attacks. I will give you some examples going forward. Of course, brute force attacks, and their targets remain vulnerable employees. In a supply chain ecosystem, you do a lot of outsourcing work to your contractors and service providers. There are business providers, and the internal accounts. So all these are the targets which are perpetuated by a lot of cyber criminals. There are competition sponsored attacks today. There are, of course, people who hack things. So these are there. Some of the examples, if you see, this is a illustration from average threats, which was there on a multinational corporate giant in US. There were 51 million blocked attempts per day, from sources with poor reputation. So you got to create a Lakshman Rekha, jo hum bolte hain. So this Lakshman Rekha in the cyber security is extremely important. And how do you create this Lakshman Rekha when you are talking of a supply chain ecosystem? Supply chain ecosystem is a this is the most vulnerable ecosystem today. If you talk about the data enterprise, it is much more secure. Even if you talk of cloud, it is still, there are tools and approaches where you can protect. But in a supply chain, you are having a small supplier who doesn't even have a proper IT infrastructure. How do you create a perimeter which can protect even such companies? There were 192 malware blocked per day. There were 3 IT security incidents per day. So these are some of the just data points which helps us to reflect how critical cybersecurity is becoming in today's world. These are the new risks which have come up, because these have the potential to disrupt the business for any organization. These are some of the examples. This was the news from 11th March 2021. Tesla was among the firms which were hit by hackers. Honda was attacked. We have seen that accounts of many, prominent leaders were compromised. We have seen many other raw material suppliers getting attacked. So this was there, and you would have heard about the solar wind hack, wherein for years together, there was a malicious security compromise which was going into their supply chain through the software that they were integrating into the component that was supplied by solar winds to their customers, and you don't know what happened. And this was a we saw this nation sponsored nation state sponsored attacks. So this solar wind farm was based out of US, and they were supplying these things, components, to various companies across the world. And it was suspected that this nation state sponsored was done by Russia. So many such examples are coming up these days, where if you cripple, the major businesses, it is also going to be a kind of a war, where you do not know where the enemy is, what tools they are deploying, and how you can protect yourself. So this is the emerging risk threat for the businesses and economies across the world. And of course, very comprehensive cyber risk management focus has to come, where you protect your data sets, you protect your employees, infrastructure, applications, and the third party. And I think this is an area which the companies are slowly recognizing and working in this area. I will not go through this slide, is slightly crowded. These are some of the threats and the control mechanisms that are being deployed. I'll just skip it for the sake of this thing. There are certain insider threats, because apart from the system risk, there is a human element also, because human element, we have a lot of privilege escalations we have seen, where the users who are not privileged to have access to certain data, they get access to many datas because of the loose control mechanisms, so there these roles, responsibilities, authorizations, creating awareness among the employees. And then very important tool, very important mechanism is how do you discover this and how do you recover it. So the time to recover is equally important, so that your business comes back into stream if you are attacked, but there is a implication on the business. So this is again some more this thing about cyber security. And so when we move to cloud computing, we also have a lot of responsibility model, because here it is a shared responsibility model. Then the access, encryption, and system security, your policy compliance monitoring. And there are two policy compliance. One is of course the company, and second is of the regulatory compliances. So you got to build controls and processes so that you are able to manage your cloud properly and your data is secure. So having said that, I think we will quickly go to some of the last slides, where what are the reflections in the way forward in this area. So as I mentioned, there are three pillars. One is the resilience. So this is very, very important. Market volatility and event-driven disruptions, which we discussed multiple examples. This will help us create robust and resilient supply chains. Sustainability, today all the stakeholders of the business, whether it is customers, consumers, regulators, everyone, they are demanding more transparency, emission reduction, and they are wanting that the supply chains are more green, clean, and lean, in terms of sustainability. Of course, digital footprint and the technology enablement is another important pillar, so these are the three key trends which are shaping the next generation supply chain. So these are some of the reflections. How can we increase our resilience? Of course, we discussed about increasing inventories of critical parts, products, diversify supplier base, rationalize product mix. So these are some of the resilience strategy which was adopted by various segments. For example, healthcare, they tend to move their offshoring to onshoring or localizing of production to this kind of an extent. Future strategy is that 90% should be onshoring. Similarly, we saw that auto is also adopting a similar strategy, moving from offshoring, outsourcing strategy to localized strategy to the extent of almost 50%. Chemical and the process industries are slightly lower today, but they would also move to at least 20 to 30% of their production to an onshore kind of a supply chain. These are some of the inflection point. How do we create strategies for agile and adaptive? We talked of risk management. We talked of supply chain management, or the planning. Moving away from deterministic planning to a probabilistic planning model, adopting technology and analytics, creating visibility end-to-end planning, network modeling. Our supply chain design needs to be revisited. Instead of a linear flow, it has to be a network flow. Another important thing is that we got to bridge the talent, where there has to be a reskilling, which is building the talent, borrowing the talent, redeploy within the organization sometimes, or buy, which is hiring the talent or the capability from outside. And lastly, we talked about supply chain security. So in simple words, we have to adopt footprint, modernize the technologies, build capabilities, and create secure network. I think we are at an inflection point as far as the businesses are concerned. And so this is my last slide. And I always end with this slide because I may not be knowing everything that you may ask, but he who knows all the answers, he's probably not asked all the, he has not been asked all the questions. This is a famous quote from Confucius. So with that, I stop and ask, we can take on more questions if we have.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for such an insightful session. I'm sure that us and all of the aspirants as well have key takeaways. So, if anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and we'll go according to the queue.
I think Sarthak has typed one question. So Sarthak says, can you please, this is to Mr. Mishra, can you please share about some specific novel ideas and projects that companies are working on to fix the supply chain issues in India or abroad?
I think Sarthak, that is a good question. The only thing I think what is there, it is very generalistic in nature, and organizations have to have very specific strategy because every organization will have a different set of problems. Like, for example, India today is severely disadvantaged because we do not have any semiconductor manufacturing in the country. We are talking of India semiconductor mission today, right? And any investments in this area will go at least 4 to 5 years down the line till we build some kind of a capability. So we have to have a different mindset and capability building as a country, then as an organization. For example, an organization like Maruti or an organization like Tata Motors, depending upon where their problem set lies, they will adopt. Now, when we went from BS4 to BS6 in the automotive industry, the input content for a lot of precious group metal went up. Now, the precious group metal has a very high value in the vehicle because of their that is why they are known as precious group metal. Even 100 grams of material costs you huge lot of money. So if you have to reduce that content, or you have to reduce the value and dependence on these fluctuations in the complexity, you got to work on optimization of this. And that can happen through a lot of engineering effort, where you work with your suppliers and adapt to. So this is again a organization specific strategy. As I was mentioning that today no country is having a sovereign autonomy in supply chain. So we got to create that. Yeah, Sanjay, sorry, Srinjay Kar.
Yeah, Srinjoy has another question. So,
Yes.
Srinjoy, can you go ahead, please?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. Thank you for this wonderful session. But sir, I would love to hear like an opinion from you, sir, about the supply chain crisis of Canada that is going on as the truckers are protesting for their COVID restriction regarding the US and the Canada borders, sir.
Yeah. Now again, there are multiple such, like for example, US also do not have drivers. I was mentioning in the beginning of my presentation. Today, even to carry trucks from the ports to various land-based destinations, truck drivers are not available, right? And so, if it were in India, for example, where we see that truckers association, they go for strike, nationwide strike once or twice in a year. It could be multiple reasons. There it is a COVID vaccine hesitancy. Here it could be fuel price increase. So every country will have their own issue. Like when Brexit happened in UK, there were multiple. There were again two schools of thoughts. One was for the Brexit, another was for not for the Brexit, because their integration with the EU, they felt that it is much more helpful than anything else. So it depends how it is going to impact your organization or the country. So there cannot be any specific one-stop solution. Ki look, if truckers are on strike, then we offer them this solution, right?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mishra. And in fact, what I find common across both your answers, and I fully concur to that everything is contextual.
Exactly.
So you have to see your organizational context, you have to see your national context, and in fact, the what you were mentioning about other countries facing similar problem, Brexit. So incidentally, I was in Ireland when Brexit happened, and there is a border issue with Northern Ireland, etc. So yes, indeed, particularly Britain is facing a supply chain crisis in in terms of non-availability of truckers.
Correct.
Earlier, when it was part of EU, so then Polish and other say East European drivers they could go, but now they need visa to enter UK.
Right.
So that's a big problem. And even in Ireland, like availability of truckers is a big problem in the Western world. So everybody moving to finance, big data, analytics, etc. So truckers are actually
Not
very
easy.
precious assets.
And that is why you see that the element of cost of truck driver salary, unlike India, it is the highest in terms of the cost operating economics for truckers in the West.
Yeah,
Like
and
fuel is the highest in India,
true.
where that there it is the truck driver cost, because they want to give that quality of life to attract them, because they are a scarce commodity.
So just to add that to that example, so yeah, because of scarcity, there is quality. They have to provide quality. So unlike our truck drivers, so say for instance, the driving cabin there will be fully AC or fully heated, depending upon the geography, and also in terms of working hours. So after say 6 to 8 hours, there will be mandatory rest and breaks,
True.
etc. So yeah. So another point I just want to touch upon, on which the question was not asked, but you, towards the second part of your presentation, you spoke heavily about cybersecurity aspect, and which is particularly crucial for supply chain because it exposes many points throughout the supply chain. So our aspirants for our MBA program will be happy to know. And in fact, Mr. Mishra, I haven't discussed it with you. I haven't got the time to discuss it with you. That IIT Jodhpur has tie-up with some of the leading foreign universities. And in the second year of our MBA, students get to attend the MS program in the partner university, and then they get the dual degree MS from the partner university and an MBA from us. So one of the key programs, and that is actually a popular program our among our existing cohort, is Sunny Albani's MS in cybersecurity and digital forensics. So even though we did not discuss, I am happy that it organically came. And then to realize that we are on the right track in terms of equipping our future students with relevant skills. So
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, of course, from a theory point of view, you would be much more better placed to add value there. But when we are talking of application security or data security, or maybe hardware security, how do you protect your organization? And today there are a lot of this operating system based security tools which are there, and I don't think there is much need for actually getting into the coding or finding out what are the vulnerabilities because of the code and other reasons which can be exploited, but at the same time creating that awareness amongst the potential uh, candidates who would be tomorrow professionals working in the corporate world. So they should be aware how and where the world is moving towards. What are those vulnerabilities? How can they be exploited? What are those risk mitigation tools available today? What are those trends? Because I'm seeing people are becoming smarter and smarter. So this is of course going to be a very very fascinating and interesting field in my opinion going forward, and it's good that students are getting exposure in this area.
So thanks a lot for your kind comments, Mr. Mishra. And in fact, more than that, many thanks for giving your precious time. And I'm sure our students as well as aspirants enjoyed it. So just one last chance, if you have any question lingering on the back of your mind. So right now is the time to ask Mr. Mishra or us. Otherwise, we'll close the session.
Sujay has mentioned some comment. And I think I tend to agree with Sujay's comment that we got to build this redundancy into the uh, uh, supply chain, even if it means creating some strategic value into the entire supply chain. So I think this is definitely going to create and help the organizations overcome current bottlenecks, if not the solutions. Unfortunately, few of the things like the semiconductor or the chip crisis, you cannot build that redundancy or the stocks
Yeah.
today because of the scarcity across.
Yeah, but it points out the interesting phenomena. Like just like after Western firms moving towards offshoring, they came back to onshoring. So similarly, I think there is slight move back from just in time to more the safety stock traditional way, if the inventory is available.
Yes, that's what I mentioned. Like for example, the Toyota Motor Corporation,
Yeah,
their model today is that was the last dance. They call it very famously infamously in the management circles these days. So last dance of just in time.
yeah, and they were the guys who pioneered JIT.
They
So
they they pioneered, but it's again context based and relevance based. You got to adapt and also adopt. So if
exactly.
you don't adapt, I mean, it's Charles Darwin philosophy. I mean, the survival of the fittest. So you got to adapt to the change. So if we don't change, we are stuck.
Yeah, and I think that's a key point. Adapt and adopt, and not just for resilience in supply chain, even resilience in our lives, perhaps. So at this positive end, I would like to end the session. And again, I would like to thank you. And I hope that your engagement with IITJ continues in different capacities so that our students learn from your deep knowledge.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. And I look forward. And of course, if you wish, I can take one session alone on the semiconductor. I have done a lot of work in this area. So maybe on the value chain of semiconductor, I can share my experience and this thing with the students, which will be, I hope, going forward. If many students they are aspiring to go into this area, because India is going to create a lot of capability, in-house capability or indigenous capability. So that can be a potential employability factor going forward. So maybe sometime we can take about that.
Okay, so all right, I won't hold you long because we have already overstepped the time you provided to us.
Thank you.
So with this, I request the admission committee to end the session. And thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to everyone who joined, and of course to our guest speaker, Mr. Mishra. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Pradeep sir and Deepak sir, for driving the session. It was very insightful. And Pradeep sir, we would love to have you on campus as well. We have a very beautiful campus. And, you said that you would be interested in having more sessions one-on-one, maybe with the admission students, maybe with the MBA students. So we're really, really looking forward to that. And happy Vasant Panchami to all again. Thank you and take care.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, and wish you all the best. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.